There exists a profound paradox in the human experience that most people never recognize until it's too late. The very qualities that make you extraordinary, that draw others to you like moths to flame, can simultaneously become the chains that bind you to a life of quiet suffering. If you've ever found yourself drowning in emotions that weren't even your own, if you've ever felt like you're carrying the weight of everyone else's world on your shoulders, then you understand the complex reality of living with a heart that feels everything in technicolor. This is the untold story of the empath's journey, a tale of beauty and burden intertwined so tightly that separating them becomes nearly impossible. It's about the price of seeing too clearly, feeling too deeply, and caring too much in a world that often mistakes sensitivity for weakness. To understand the empath's struggle, we must first recognize what sets them apart from the rest of humanity. An empath doesn't simply observe life, they absorb it. They don't just witness emotions, they become them. When you speak to an empath, they don't merely hear your words, they feel the tremor in your voice, the hesitation between syllables, the unspoken grief hiding behind your smile. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's neurological reality. Scientific research has revealed that empaths possess heightened activity in their mirror neuron systems, those remarkable brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe others performing the same action. For most people, these neurons create basic understanding and connection. For empaths, they create an almost supernatural ability to step inside another person's emotional experience. Imagine walking into a room and instantly knowing that someone had been crying, even though their face shows no trace of tears. Picture feeling your chest tighten with anxiety when your colleague mentions a deadline, not because you're worried about your own work, but because you've unconsciously absorbed their stress. This is the daily reality for those blessed and cursed with empathic sensitivity. But here's where the gift becomes complicated. While society celebrates empaths as natural healers, compassionate listeners, and emotional anchors, it rarely acknowledges the devastating toll this constant emotional absorption takes on the individual. The empath becomes like a sponge in an ocean of feelings, soaking up everything around them until they're so saturated with others' emotions that they can no longer distinguish their own. The first shadow that haunts the empath is the gradual disappearance of their own identity. When you spend your days feeling what others feel, thinking what others think, and carrying what others carry, you begin to lose track of where they end. And it's like living in a house of mirrors, where every reflection shows someone else's face. This erosion happens so subtly that most empaths don't notice it until they're already lost. It starts with small compromises, saying yes when you mean no, because you can feel the disappointment radiating from the person asking. It continues with staying in situations that drain you because leaving would cause pain to others, and you've become so attuned to their suffering that it feels like your own. The empath learns to navigate the world by reading everyone else's emotional weather, but in doing so, they forget their own climate. They become experts at managing other people's storms while their own inner landscape remains unexplored and unattended. This is how someone can be surrounded by people who love and depend on them, yet feel profoundly alone and unseen. The psychological term emotional labor takes on new meaning when applied to the empath's experience. While most people perform emotional labor as part of their relationships and work, empaths live inside it. They don't just manage their own feelings and occasionally help others with theirs. They become the emotional processing center for everyone in their orbit. What the world doesn't see is the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from this constant emotional processing. While others go home and decompress from their day, empaths carry everyone else's unresolved feelings with them. They lie awake at night, replaying conversations, not just their own words, but the emotions they sense beneath the surface of every interaction. This isn't the kind of tiredness that sleep can cure. It's a soul weariness that comes from being perpetually on, perpetually available, perpetually absorbing. Research in neuroscience has shown that chronic emotional overload can lead to physical symptoms, headaches, insomnia, digestive issues, and a compromised immune system. The body keeps score of every emotion processed, every feeling absorbed, every boundary crossed. Yet empaths rarely give themselves permission to rest because they've internalized the belief that their worth is tied to their availability. They fear that if they step back, if they create boundaries, if they say no, they'll be seen as selfish or uncaring. This fear keeps them trapped in cycles of giving until they have nothing left to give. Perhaps one of the cruelest ironies of the empath's journey is how their very compassion makes them targets for those who would exploit it. Empaths often find themselves in relationships with narcissists, manipulators, and emotional vampires, not because they enjoy being mistreated, but because their natural inclination to see the best in people and their ability to feel others' pain makes them perfect candidates for manipulation. The narcissist sees the empath's endless well of compassion and thinks, "Here is someone who will never leave me, no matter how badly I behave." The manipulator recognizes the empath's soft boundaries and thinks, "Here is someone I can control through guilt and emotional pressure." The emotional vampire senses the empath's energy and thinks, "Here is someone who will always be available to drain." This creates a devastating cycle where the empath's greatest strength becomes their greatest vulnerability. They stay in toxic relationships, not because they don't recognize the toxicity, but because they can feel the pain and brokenness in the other person so acutely that leaving feels like abandonment. They confuse enabling with loving, rescuing with caring, and sacrifice with devotion. As empaths navigate these challenging dynamics, many develop what could be called a savior complex, an unconscious addiction to being needed, to fixing others, to being the solution to everyone else's problems. This isn't born from ego or superiority. It's born from the deep conditioning that their value lies in their ability to heal and help others. The empath begins to derive their sense of worth from how much pain they can absorb, how many people they can rescue, how indispensable they can make themselves. They become addicted to the feeling of being needed, even when that need is draining them dry. This creates a twisted form of codependency, where the empath needs others to need them, and others learn to depend on the empath's endless giving. This pattern is particularly insidious, because it masquerades as virtue. Society applauds the self-sacrificing helper, the person who puts everyone else first, the individual who never says no to someone in need. But what looks like saintliness from the outside often feels like imprisonment from within. To understand why empathy has become such a burden in contemporary life, we must consider the evolutionary context in which this trait developed. Thousands of years ago, empaths were the early warning systems of their tribes. Their ability to sense danger, read group dynamics, and maintain social cohesion was crucial for survival. They might have been responsible for feeling and responding to the emotions of perhaps 20 or 30 people in their immediate community. Today's empath faces a radically different challenge. Through social media, news cycles, and global connectivity, they're exposed to the suffering of millions. Every scroll through their phone brings new tragedies, new pain, new reasons to feel overwhelmed by the state of the world. Their ancient nervous system, designed to handle the emotional climate of a small tribe, is now bombarded with the collective anguish of humanity. This creates what psychologists call compassion fatigue, the emotional and physical exhaustion that results from caring for others in distress. For empaths, this isn't just an occupational hazard, it's a daily reality. They feel personally responsible for suffering they can't possibly address, guilty for their own happiness when others are in pain, and overwhelmed by the sheer volume of need in the world. Many empaths trace their heightened sensitivity back to childhood experiences that required them to become emotional radar systems for survival. Children who grow up in unpredictable environments, where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where love felt conditional, or where they had to manage adult emotions to maintain safety, often develop hypervigilant empathic abilities. This survival mechanism serves them well in childhood, helping them navigate dangerous emotional terrain. But it becomes a burden in adulthood, when they continue to operate as if everyone's emotional state is their responsibility to monitor and manage. The child who learned to read their alcoholic father's mood to avoid his rage becomes the adult who can't stop absorbing their colleagues' stress. The child who comforted their depressed mother becomes the adult who feels guilty for their own happiness. Understanding this origin story is crucial because it reveals that for many empaths, their sensitivity isn't just a personality trait, it's a trauma response that has been praised and reinforced by society. This makes healing more complex because it requires distinguishing between healthy empathy and hypervigilant survival mechanisms. One of the most difficult aspects of the empath shadow is the resentment that can build over time. When you give endlessly and receive little in return, when you're always the one listening, but rarely heard, when you're expected to be strong for everyone else, but have no one to be vulnerable with, a quiet bitterness can take root. This resentment is particularly painful for empaths, because it conflicts with their self-image as loving, compassionate people. They feel guilty for feeling angry, ashamed for wanting reciprocity, and confused by their own emotional reactions. They might find themselves thinking, "I should be grateful that people trust me with their problems," while simultaneously feeling exhausted and unseen. This internal conflict can lead to passive-aggressive behaviors, emotional withdrawal, or sudden outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. The empath who has been giving and giving suddenly snaps, leaving everyone around them confused and hurt. But this isn't cruelty. It's the inevitable result of a system that has been pushed beyond its limits. The journey out of the empath's shadow doesn't involve feeling less, it involves feeling wiser. It requires learning to distinguish between empathy and absorption, between compassion and codependency, between helping and enabling. The goal isn't to build walls around your heart, but to install gates that you can open and close at will. This transformation begins with the radical act of self-compassion. Empaths must learn to extend to themselves the same kindness they so freely give to others. They must recognize that their needs matter, that their feelings are valid, and that taking care of themselves isn't selfish. It's essential. Boundary setting becomes a crucial skill, not as a way to shut people out, but as a way to engage more authentically. When empaths learn to say no to what drains them, they can say yes to what truly matters. When they stop trying to save everyone, they can focus their energy on making a real difference where it counts. The most beautiful aspect of the empath's journey is that their greatest wounds can become their greatest strengths. The person who has been broken by feeling too much and has learned to heal becomes an incredibly powerful force for good in the world. They understand suffering intimately, but they also understand resilience. They know what it means to be overwhelmed, but they also know what it takes to find balance. These transformed empaths don't stop caring. They care more effectively. They don't become cold. They become discerning. They don't shut down their sensitivity. They learn to channel it purposefully. They become like skilled surgeons of the soul, able to cut precisely where healing is needed, without causing unnecessary damage. When empaths reclaim their power and learn to work with their gift rather than be enslaved by it, the impact extends far beyond their personal lives. They become models of what healthy sensitivity looks like. They show others that it's possible to care deeply without drowning, to be compassionate without being codependent, to be strong and soft simultaneously. These empowered empaths often become leaders, artists, healers, and change-makers who use their deep understanding of human nature to create positive transformation in the world. They write the books that heal hearts, create the art that moves souls, build the organizations that serve humanity, and raise the children who will carry empathy forward into the future. The ultimate wisdom of the empath's journey lies in learning to hold both the light and shadow aspects of their gift. They acknowledge that their sensitivity can be both blessing and burden, that their compassion can be both strength and vulnerability, that their depth can be both gift and challenge. This integration doesn't happen overnight. It's a lifelong process of learning, growing, and evolving. It requires constant vigilance against old patterns, ongoing commitment to self-care, and the courage to keep choosing growth over comfort. But for those who undertake this journey, the rewards are immeasurable. In our current global climate of division, disconnection, and despair, the world desperately needs empaths who have learned to wield their gift consciously. We need people who can feel deeply without drowning, who can see clearly without being blinded by pain, who can love fiercely without losing themselves in the process. These conscious empaths become bridges between worlds, able to understand multiple perspectives, translate between different emotional languages, and hold space for healing in a fractured world. They become the leaders we need, the healers we crave, and the hope we seek. The dark side of the empath isn't something to be feared or avoided. It's something to be understood, honored, and transformed. It's the initiation that leads to true empowerment, the shadow that teaches us to appreciate the light, the wound that becomes the source of our greatest healing power. For every empath reading this, remember, your sensitivity is not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be refined. Your depth is not a burden to be carried, but a gift to be shared. Your journey through the darkness is not a detour from your path, but the very road that leads to your destiny as a conscious, empowered, and transformative force in this world. The choice is yours. Will you remain a victim of your own compassion, or will you become a master of your empathic gifts? The world is waiting for your answer, and more importantly, your soul is ready for your transformation.